Hi, Ady. Oh, I'm so happy
Hello,
to
hello.
see you.
Good to see you.
Hi. You look good. You look good. Oh,
Hello,
it's good
hello.
to see
Good to
you.
see you.
Good to see you. Okay, I'll sit. I know we have a lot to talk about. And congratulations on the baby. That's really fantastic.
No need to flatter, but thank you. Senator, it's so good to see you again.
Thank you.
The last time we saw each other was at an immigration rally in LA over a year ago.
Yeah.
My son Carl was with me and he
Yeah.
loved seeing you.
Yeah.
He's 3 now. My wife Rachel really wanted to make it today, but she's teaching a summer research seminar at UC Santa Barbara for a small group of Howard students.
I heard.
They're super excited this interview is happening and they wanted to be here. Last summer, we traveled around the country mobilizing Democrats to take back Congress. Donald Trump is doing so much damage to our communities and our democracy, and I felt it was worth the personal sacrifice to do everything possible to stop him. Everywhere we went, voters told us that healthcare is one of the most important issues for them. And that is why I want to have this conversation. We need an amazing presidential candidate and an amazing healthcare agenda to unite behind if we are going to win.
That's right.
Welcome back to California. When you return after being away, what home food comforts you? What do you do to decompress?
Oh, you're so wonderful to ask. Well, what I do to decompress is I cook. So let me tell you, I woke up at 5 o'clock this morning and I'm making these Vietnamese short ribs. So you may smell the garlic and ginger and lemongrass on me right now. And, you know, it's just about being with family. And I just love being with family and cooking for them. That's what I do to decompress.
As I lose the ability to eat, I have to enjoy vicariously.
Yeah.
So give me 2 more of your favorite dishes.
So I love doing a roast chicken. So one of the things I love about being home is I have an herb garden, and I have rosemary, I have thyme, and sage, and I go in the garden, and I chop all that up, and then I grate lemon rind, and I chop garlic, and then I put all of that in the chicken, and I roast it, slow roast it, and it's one of my family's favorites.
Thank you. I'm sated.
Good.
Senator, you've had an impressive career. I wanted to start by asking about one of the first, most consequential decisions you ever made.
Yeah.
When you graduated law school, you could have become a corporate lawyer and you would have made many millions of dollars over your career. But you chose instead to be a public servant, working to make society better.
Yeah.
Why did you decide that the best way you could serve the public was to be a prosecutor?
So my childhood was a childhood of being raised by people who were active in the civil rights movement. And their fight was a fight for equality and for freedom. It was a fight to make sure that the vulnerable among us have strength and have power and have a voice and dignity. And I also grew up knowing the strengths of the criminal justice system and its many weaknesses, including that it was in many ways informed by bias, and you know that there was the failed war on drugs. There was criminalizing public health issues like drug addiction, and I made a decision that knowing what was wrong with it, knowing that it needed to be reformed, that I would go in the inside and try to reform it from that place. And I'll tell you, Ady, you know, it was early in my career, for example, when it was during the height of the crack epidemic. And California was passing all of these incredibly draconian laws, including the laws around gang enhancement, and people were trying to figure out how do you prove it. And I was literally standing in my office when people were talking about how they were going to prove a gang enhancement based on how people were dressed, the music they listened to, the neighborhood in which they were arrested. And I said, look, I have people who live in that neighborhood, family members who dress that way, and then I'm going to date myself. And I have a tape of that music in my car right now. And it was about doing the work of saying that if a criminal justice system is going to be just, it has to treat everyone equally. And it was about saying if the criminal justice system is really about public safety, then one of the smartest ways to keep people safe is to prevent crime from happening in the first place, which is why I've always focused on public education. I've always focused on the need to make sure that our children get all the support they need. And then it was the work of, when I was elected as DA, starting one of the first initiatives in the country to get young drug dealers who were, low-level sales of drugs, get them jobs in counseling, and then dismiss the charges against them because they lived a productive life. So those are some examples.
Senator Harris, I would like to begin our discussion of health care today on a personal note.
Yeah.
You've written that the day your mother was diagnosed with cancer was one of the worst days of your life.
Yeah.
Tell me about that, and what her battle taught you about the healthcare system in this country.
Mm-hmm. It was awful. And for anyone, and so many of us have had the experience of that first time hearing that there is an illness that will lead to death, and fairly rapidly. My mother, she said to my sister and me, I want to meet you guys for lunch. And she showed up at the restaurant wearing makeup. My mother never wore makeup. And her hair was blow dried, and she was wearing she was dressed up. And I looked at my sister, I said, what is going on? And my mother walked to the table, and she took our hands, and she said she'd been diagnosed with colon cancer. So it is, that was one of the worst days of my life, truly. But, it is also, as you know and your family knows, just give me a second. It is about going through a system that is complicated. It is. There are elements of it that work and elements of it that do not work. Give me a second. Ady, I knew this was going to happen. I was like, I am not going to tear up. I promised myself I was not going to tear up. But you got me. You have something to say? I'm going to wait to hear it, and then I'll go on.
I haven't even started. Please go ahead.
So, the experience was the experience of, we have a healthcare system that is very difficult to navigate. And the experience of going through my mother's illness with her was the experience of, a number of things. Seeing how you go to, different specialists for different kinds of treatment, and the medications that they're prescribing is different. And so you're looking at the charts. I consider myself to be a fairly intelligent person, but I don't know medicine. I don't know the language of medicine. And looking at charts and figuring out, well, this is not reflective of this chart in terms of the medication she's supposed to be taking. Or what's on that chart is clearly a medication that I recognize her saying had really adverse impacts on her, and she didn't like it. So it's about being an advocate for your family member, somebody you love. It's about, going through chemotherapy, which means, I'd pick my mother up and we'd go to the place where they do the chemotherapy, and you walk into a room and everyone's there attached to the machine. And, I'd kind of try and tell her funny stories, and sometimes she was kind of engaged and sometimes not. And then very tired after. There was a place that she loved, this bakery. And so I'd try to get her to go to the bakery after chemo. It's about trying to give people clothes that are soft enough, right? Because so many things, the skin becomes so sensitive. So I'd get her hats, especially in the winter, that were soft enough, or scarves that were soft enough. Trying to cook, because you need to eat, and trying to figure out what I can feed you that you might have an appetite for, that you can even taste, much less hold down. It's having those scares where everything seems to be going well, but there are plateaus. None of it is really gradual, as I learned. There are plateaus. And then a plateau drops, or maybe sometimes it picks up, but you don't see it coming. And it's having a medical professional. I will never forget this. Doctor looked at me and said, "Has anyone talked to you about anticipatory grief?" Which is a term I'd never heard, but of course it's self-explanatory, which is the grief you're feeling knowing you're going to lose somebody who's still there. And the thing that I feel so strongly about is that it is so difficult for people who are going through that, the person who's going through that, much less their family and their caregiver. But that family would also have to worry about how to pay the bills. And that they might be looking at bankruptcy while they're going through all this other stuff. It's just inhumane. This is the nature of things. We cannot keep the people we love alive as long as we like when they're sick. That's a fact. It's sad and it's awful. But there are things we can do. There are things that are within our power, such as having a healthcare system, right, that is actually kind to people who go through it, meaning they don't have to worry about how they can afford it. And while they're trying to figure out how they can relieve the pain or improve the quality of life of someone who is sick, that they also have to worry about how they can save their house or keep their job, because we have no paid family leave, right? So the way that I think
What you're saying is ringing true to my daily experience. Mm-hmm. Exactly. As California Attorney General, you took action against insurance industry greed, and successfully won a $320 million settlement from a private Medicare Advantage plan that was defrauding California and the federal government to get bigger Medicare and medical payments for elder care. That's right. Can you talk a little bit about that case, and what it taught you? How have you come to understand the role of private insurance companies in our healthcare system?
So, last year alone, the top 8 insurance companies and insurance companies profited $72 billion. In my estimation, on the back of American families. They've been jacking up copays, they've been jacking up deductibles, and it has, for the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies, been a business model that is motivated by profit over public health. And it is inhumane what we have seen as a result. I often talk about, the mother or father who sits in the parking lot in front of the hospital trying to figure out how they can take their child through the sliding glass doors of the emergency room, but worried that if they go through those sliding glass doors, they're going to be out of pocket a $5,000 deductible. That literally money is the reason even when people have insurance, for why they may not get the health care they deserve. So in that case, it was about seeing how private insurance and private insurers were bilking people, were taking advantage of them. And that, again, the business model was not about giving people the health care they need. And let's be clear about this. Access to health care should be a human right, a civil right, and a right, and not just a privilege of those who can afford it. Government has 3 essential functions: public education, public safety, and public health. And we've got to do a better job, which is why I have a Medicare for All plan. Everybody should be covered, and money should not be the reason people don't get the health care they deserve.
Senator, it's not hard to see that our healthcare system is in crisis. Tens of millions of people still have no guaranteed health care, and many who have insurance coverage are turning to GoFundMe when their insurance companies deny necessary care.
Yeah.
Literally yesterday, I got a letter from my health insurance company denying my request for home health care. Other people are dying because they can't afford their insulin.
Right.
Democrats are debating different ways to address this crisis. You originally co-sponsored Bernie's Medicare for All plan, but recently, you said you are not comfortable with it anymore. You have come out with your own different vision. Can you explain your plan, and why you believe it is better than the Medicare for All bill you originally co-sponsored when you first came to the Senate?
Yeah. I've always been for Medicare for All, and still am, obviously. And Bernie's bill is good, but we could do better. And so there are a number of things about my bill that are different. One is we are looking at giving people a 10-year transition period into the plan instead of 4 years. And I'll tell you why, Ady. In large part, I was meeting with people and hearing from them, in particular, members of organized labor who negotiate their deals, usually on a 5-year term, and had negotiated so they would take less wages for a better health care plan. And they were saying to me, Kamala, you can't take that away from us. And this doesn't give us enough time, a 4-year transition period, to renegotiate. I was meeting with people around the country who were saying, look, we want to have an option of having a private plan. Don't take away our options. And so I said, okay, under my Medicare for All plan, there will be an option for a public plan or a private plan. But the insurance companies are going to have to play by our rules, which means the private plans cannot charge copays, cannot charge deductibles. The other point that I wanted to make is the coupling of insurance with employment. That's got to stop, because there are so many people in our country who are losing their jobs. You know, if you think about it, over the next 15 years, up to 40% of the jobs that currently exist will no longer exist. People are getting laid off. People are going through transition in employment. And it shouldn't be that they lose their health care when they lose their job. So I'm also decoupling insurance from employers so that people will be able to have insurance whether or not they're working for a specific employer. And by the way, the architects of the Affordable Care Act, including Kathleen Sebelius, said that my plan is actually the most effective plan to getting coverage for all people.
Senator Harris, you use the phrase Medicare for All when talking about your health care plan. But if I understand correctly from what you have just laid out, your plan is closer to a combination of private and public options than single-payer Medicare for All. So why are you calling it Medicare for All?
Because everybody will be covered. Nobody will be without coverage, and it will be a Medicare system. So it will be that individuals are not paying for it. It's going to be a public system where we are going to have extended benefits, so it's not going to be the Medicare that exists currently. It will include dental, it will include vision, it will include hearing aids. But there will be an option within the Medicare for All system, but private insurers have to be in our system. So this is not an independent system, and it'll be by our rules in terms of a Medicare for All system. But we can't take options away from people who strongly want them. And so to your point, it is similar to the Medicare Advantage system, which we currently have. So that's no different. Medicare for All currently includes private plans, and ours would do the same. So it's Medicare for All, as it currently exists, but for everybody.
So, as you know, I also have a perspective on this question, and I appreciate your willingness to come here and have this discussion with me. I would like to tell you why I believe that single-payer Medicare for all is the best approach, and I'd like you to tell me where you disagree.
Okay.
Here goes. First, only Medicare for all will get everyone the care they need. Under your plan, millions of people like me will still be denied care by their for-profit insurance company during the 10-year transition period and afterwards. In addition, people will avoid getting needed care because of high copays and deductibles. Second, only a true Medicare for all system will drive down costs. It will save us hundreds of billions of dollars per year in administrative and billing costs that are the result of a for-profit insurance system. That will not happen if providers still have to bill numerous insurance companies. Finally, there is the political reality. The insurance industry is going to do everything it can to block any of these proposals, including yours. Which means the only way to win is with a huge grassroots movement. And from what I can see, that enthusiasm only exists for Medicare for all. I'm worried that people aren't gonna march or engage in civil disobedience in support of more modest reforms. So where am I wrong?
So under my Medicare for All plan, on day one, you can get into the system of Medicare for All and have a public plan. You don't have to do a private plan. It's your choice. So you would not be denied under my Medicare for All plan, because on day one, you would automatically fold into it. Anyone on Medicaid, which of course we know is so many of members of our disability community are on Medicaid, which is not covering all that they need, would immediately be able to roll in to our Medicare for All plan. And it's your choice if you want under the public plan or you want a private plan. So you would not lose, and it would not be that you have to wait for the 10-year transition. You on day one would be able to be in our plan. And it would be your choice. And they would have to compete.
Who would be eligible?
Everyone. Everyone is eligible. There's no eligibility threshold in terms of who can be in my Medicare for All plan at all. And it will cover everyone.
And what do employers pay?
Employers are out of it. They're going to pay, but no, they're going to pay an additional tax, though, to help pay for the overall plan. But employers no longer will be in the business of providing coverage for their employees. We're taking it away from employers, but one of the ways that we're paying for the Medicare for All plan is that employers are going to have to pay an additional tax. And for them, the benefit is that they'll actually not have to then deal with the coverage for their employees. So we're taking them out of the business of it altogether.
So under your plan, what would health coverage look like for the first 10 years during the transition, and what would it look like once your plan is fully implemented?
So and experts are all saying within the first 5 years of my plan, the majority of Americans will be in the plan, because starting with day one, Medicaid will fold in. Babies born will immediately be in the plan. There are approximately 4 million babies born a year in our country. And all who want to fold in immediately will fold into our plan. The transition covers, for example, our friends who are in labor, who want to go through the cycle of what they've already negotiated, which is roughly a 5-year cycle for most of them, and then renegotiate with the plans that exist around what is in their best interest in terms of wages. But it actually then takes the discussion of wages away from the employer. They can demand the wages that they deserve, because they're not going to have to negotiate any longer with their employer for the coverage that they need. And that's a benefit for a lot of people who otherwise, as labor unions, have to negotiate with the employer to get the coverage they need. We're taking the employer out of the business of being able to have the power to determine what kind of coverage their employee gets. And that's a huge benefit of our plan.
And then what is different at the end of 10 years?
Everyone is in the plan. So it just gives it makes it a smoother transition, but at the end, everyone is in the plan.
Senator Harris, Your plan has a 10-year transition period until it is fully enacted, spanning the course of at least 2 different presidencies. Given what you saw of Donald Trump's attempts to dismantle Obamacare, why do you think the transition to a different health care system should be so gradual, giving the Republicans many opportunities to block it?
What we saw in effect and what we saw as the end result is, yes, they played politics with public health. They named the Affordable Care Act the Obamacare in an attempt, they thought, to make it unpopular. But what we saw happen is that when more people get coverage, and under our plan, within the first 5 years, the majority of Americans will be covered, as opposed to currently 30 million Americans not having coverage, is that the people speak. And there's a great amount of power and political power in the people. If we remember even the town halls that we watched in the early years of the Trump administration, when they put everything they had into defeating the Affordable Care Act. And people in so-called red states said, don't take our health care away from us. When the American people speak in the volumes that they have and will, when those tens of millions of people who don't have coverage get it, they're more powerful than these politicians. And we've seen that happen, and it'll happen again.
Senator, please forgive me for being blunt, but I don't know if I'll have the chance to interview you again, and these issues are deeply personal for me.
Yeah.
I feel like this is the core of it. Do you think it is fair to say that you philosophically believe the insurance companies play a useful role, and should continue existing? Like, the one you prosecuted in California. This seems to me like the split between candidates who believe insurance industries are themselves a huge driver of the crisis, and others who believe they can be part of the solution.
I believe that those who abuse the system should be held accountable, which is why I prosecuted those private insurers. And we can handle the abusers, but I am not trying to get rid of all private insurance. The problem with private insurance is that they've been writing the rules, and they have been taking advantage of consumers. And so this is about saying we're going to take them out of the business of having profit be the guiding force for the way they conduct themselves. And if they don't play by our rules, they don't play. They literally will not be able to be in our system. And so it is about elimination of copays, elimination of deductibles. It is about saying that they cannot make decisions about which provider you can see in terms of which healthcare professional you can see. They don't get to make those decisions anymore. And if they can compete in our system, they'll be there. And they'll find a way, but it has to be by our rules, because you're exactly right. They've been taking advantage because they've had a monopoly in the market. And they've been taking advantage of families and individuals who have nowhere else to go. Under my Medicare for All plan, people, meaning individuals and families, are going to have options. So if they can compete with those options, they'll exist. If they can't, they're going to go away. So it's not about keeping the private insurers in business. It's about allowing people to have options, meaning the individuals, if the private insurers can compete. But Ady, I'm telling you, people feel very strongly about this. And I don't want to take options away from people if the insurance companies can compete. But you're exactly right. And you know from my background, I am completely prepared to take the insurance companies on. I've done it before, I'll do it again. This is not about any concern about the insurance companies in terms of their power or their influence, because I've gone after them before. There are very few people on that debate stage, if any, who have actually taken them on. I've done it.
Okay, another policy question that's personal for me. One of the biggest problems in our system is that we don't provide for long-term care.
Yeah.
Elders and disabled people like me either have to move into nursing homes, or pay out of pocket for care and rely on our family members.
Yeah.
This imposes huge financial and psychological burdens on families, particularly on women.
Yeah.
And it means that care work is not compensated properly, the women around the country who do the majority of care for elderly and disabled Americans are paid poverty wages even though they are doing some of the most important and difficult work there is. One thing that I love about the Medicare for All bill is that it solves this problem. It covers long-term care just like all other health care. And by doing that, it transitions the industry into one with good wages. How does your plan address long-term care?
It is covered. It is covered, and to your point, these caregivers are often, they are family members of the person who needs care. They are invested. They are predominantly women, mostly women of color, and they are paid, to your point, poverty wages. I'm also supporting caregivers actually organizing for the purposes of their ability to collectively bargain. I have spent time with those caregivers, and obviously I played my own part as it relates to my mother. But to your point, the work they do, it's physically demanding. It is about literally, physically helping the person they are caring for get up, get out of bed, and all of the details of what one must do during the course of a day. It is emotional, especially when we are talking about family members. It is around the clock. It's not a 9 to 5 by any stretch of the imagination. And we are not appropriately compensating. So this is about not only what we do to pay them, it's about giving them all of the resources they need. To your point, those caregivers have to then, if we're talking about medical devices and the kinds of, right, the tools that a caregiver needs to actually help appropriately care for someone are expensive and unavailable, and currently under a lot of the coverage programs are not covered, or substandard quality is covered, but the best quality is not. And these are some of the issues that we address in my plan.
I'm glad to hear that. Rees, a follow-up from what you said earlier. Do you agree, Senator, that many people love their doctor and not their insurance company?
Absolutely. Absolutely. In fact, to your point, 91% of the doctors in America are in the Medicare system. And those that are not, the majority of them are pediatricians, and the only reason they're not in the Medicare system is because children aren't in the Medicare system. And under my plan, children will be in the system starting day one. The babies born immediately will be in our Medicare system, and so the pediatricians will be a part of it. But you're absolutely right. Nobody is out there defending their insurance company. What they are is they want their doctor, and they want to know that they get the coverage that they need, and that someone else, be it their employer or the insurance company, is not making the decisions about what kind of care they receive and from whom they receive it.
Let's move on to another huge aspect of the healthcare system, the pharmaceutical industry.
Yeah.
Right now, companies like Pfizer get to charge whatever they want for prescription drugs. There's a real human cost to that. Here's a story a woman named Reagan recently sent me on Twitter. I was recently diagnosed with diabetes and my insulin cost $3,000. I can't afford that. I don't take my prescribed dose, I usually do half or less. We shouldn't have to live like this.
Yep, you're
No
right.
kidding. You have said you want to empower the Secretary of Health and Human Services to negotiate drug prices directly with manufacturers.
Yes.
I agree. All the other senators running for president have sponsored the Improving Access to Affordable Prescription Drugs Act, which would mandate transparency about the actual cost of drug development, create a $2 billion prize fund for new antibiotics, provide public funding for clinical trials, and make it harder for pharmaceutical companies to play various tricks with patents. Some senators are even proposing that the government should manufacture drugs directly. Why haven't you co-sponsored these bills, and what is your vision for addressing the price of drugs?
I believe on those bills, so we should follow up on that. Let's follow up on that. And maybe my team is here. I don't see anyone from my team at the moment. Hi. Let's follow up on that right away. What I am proposing is not only that through legislation, which a lot of people are, they're talking about legislation. I'm also prepared to take executive action if Congress does not comply. So One, yes, that the Secretary of Health and Human Services would set drug prices so that they are fair, and the standard would be what people around the globe are being charged, because as we know, the American consumer is being charged so much more than our friends, for example, in Canada. I'm also prepared to say that we will, by executive action, be able to set the prices, and in particular for any drug that was developed as a result of federal funding in terms of the research that went into it, because we will then have jurisdiction over that. And in addition to your point about what is going on right now, 1 in 4 diabetes patients cannot afford their insulin. There is a syringe that contains a drug that, if applied to a person who has OD'd from opioids, will save their life, and that syringe can cost $4,000. Our seniors are out of pocket on average $4,000 a year for arthritis medication, which they cannot afford, especially those on Social Security. I am meeting seniors around our country, in particular in our northern states, who are getting on buses to go to Canada to buy their prescription medication, because otherwise they're making a decision about either filling their refrigerator or filling their prescription. It's a huge issue. So not only do I have proposals that are about what we need to do to bring down the price by way of legislation, but also, Ady, I'm saying if we don't get it passed through a Senate and a Congress that historically, over the years, have not stood up to the drug companies, that I'll take executive action. It's one of the biggest drivers of not only cost, but the barrier to people actually getting the care they need, is that they literally cannot afford their medication.
Forgive me if I was wrong. I appreciate your response.
I'm going to follow up, though.
The opioid crisis has reached staggering heights. Nearly 70,000 Americans died from drug overdoses last year, far outpacing other public health crises like gun violence and automobile accidents. What is your plan to address the opioid addiction epidemic in this country?
Yeah. So again, I'm on a number of bills, but the bottom line is that we have to understand that this is a public health crisis that is not new. We experienced it with the crack epidemic. And part of the failure of our government was to treat it as a criminal issue instead of a public health issue. And treating it as a public health issue means, one, addressing the untreated, undiagnosed and untreated trauma that exists in many communities, addressing what we need to do about going after those pharmaceutical executives and prosecuting them because they clearly knew what they were doing, and I'm fully in favor of doing that. And then it has to be about getting access to services. I'm spending a lot of time in rural communities, for example, where there are literally no service providers available, both in terms of mental health treatment and drug treatment. If you'll allow me, the details on this include, for a lot of our rural communities, they might benefit from telemedicine, but there's no broadband there. And all of these issues are obviously connected. So it is about not only building up the infrastructure around broadband so that telemedicine is more prevalent as a way to give people access to the health care they need that they otherwise don't have, but it also has to be about putting the dollars and the work into direct payment of service providers and having drug treatment on demand. That is part of my proposal, and having mental health care on demand. And then again, the consequences to the executives and the pharmaceutical companies that have been pushing this drug, knowing of its effects without any responsibility for what they've created, which is a crisis epidemic.
So do you support decriminalization of drugs like heroin, which are being spiked and causing the deaths?
I am for legalization of marijuana, but decriminalization of heroin is something that I'm not there yet. We'd have to talk about it in greater length. I think that there's no question, though, that we have to decriminalize addiction, and we should not criminalize addiction, and there's no question in my mind about that. But obviously, it is not just about addiction. When we're talking about drug laws, we also have to think about those that are engaged in it in a way that is lethal in terms of the proportion, in terms of if it's associated with violence, if it's associated with extortion and profit. But I'm absolutely, absolutely in favor of decriminalizing addiction to drugs, whatever that drug might be.
Okay, Senator, last question. Since my diagnosis, I have been thinking a lot about my legacy. I hope that Carl, Rachel, and other people in my life remember me as a committed husband, father, and as someone who spent his life trying to serve the public interest. As someone who spent my life trying to live up to the privilege that was conferred on me by circumstance of my birth, I think being forced to confront my own mortality has made me think about that in stark terms. I'm curious, what do you want your legacy to be, after you eventually exit the stage of national politics? How do you want to be remembered?
I want to be remembered as having lifted the quality of life and circumstances of everyone, and in particular those who historically have been outside the access to resources and power and opportunity. That's very important to me. I want to know that my life has been about actually having impact. I'll tell you, Ady, so much of the work I've done over my career, it's not been about a lovely speech. It's not been about some grand gesture. It's about actual work that I've done, such as creating a national model and showing, back when this was not being done, that you can give former drug sales offenders jobs in counseling and dismiss the charges against them, and they will thrive. It's been about the work of saying that we will lift up the public education system in our country, and we will see that those children in particular living in poor communities and communities of color, they will thrive. The work that I have done in my career and that I hope to continue to do is about actually showing that when you put resources into the people and you see the capacity of people, that they will thrive and we all will benefit as a result.
Senator Harris, this has been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Ady.
It means a lot to me to sit here with you.
Thank you. Thank you.